Welcome back to our channel where we share updates and untold stories about Catherine, Princess of Wales and her royal family. Today we bring you some news. Duchess Sophie reveals shocking secret of Beatrice's husband, stuns whole nation. A significant financial scandal has apparently unsettled segments of the British royal family, focusing on allegations of theft and fraud, purportedly involving Edoardo Mozzi, the spouse of Princess Beatrice of York. Sources familiar with internal processes and the relevant papers indicate that millions of pounds seem to have been misappropriated from royal estate finances into a network of private enterprises and offshore accounts. A normal internal audit transformed into a clandestine investigation, a private familial clash inside royal chambers, and a legal and personal reckoning that incited profound introspection within the institution. This narrative delineates the progression of events from the first irregular entry in a ledger to the policies and human decisions that influence the subsequent outcomes derived from interviews with relevant individuals and the documentation they provided. Understanding the complexity of the problem requires familiarity with the key individuals and their perceptions inside the family and among the staff. Sophie, Duchess of Edinburgh, formerly the Countess of Wessex, spouse of Prince Edward, has always been seen by household personnel and advisors as systematic, discreet, and dependable. Colleagues see her as a confident individual whose assurance stems from composure rather than ostentation. She has a history in public relations and philanthropy, meticulous attention to detail, and the capacity to engage in difficult discussions without drama. Colleagues privately refer to Sophie as a safe pair of hands, recognizing her comprehension of the nuances and traditions of royal life, as well as her pivotal role in organizational affairs throughout her tenure as Countess. Her proximity to the late Queen Elizabeth II is often referenced not just as a social connection, but also as evidence of her composed demeanor under challenging situations. In recent years, as top positions evolved and public expectations changed, Sophie discreetly assumed more responsibility in estate management and internal governance, a function that is both administrative and custodial in its obligation to safeguard the Crown's interests. Princess Beatrice of York, the oldest daughter of Prince Andrew and Sarah, Duchess of York, has a distinct position within that sphere. She has endeavored to reconcile public responsibilities with a private career, sometimes navigating the delicate boundary between familial legacy and professional pursuits in business and technology. Beatrice's wedding to Edoardo Mozzi in July 2020, a modest event due to the epidemic, was officially characterized as a modern marriage. Acquaintances saw the pair as merging royal formality with current entrepreneurial pursuits. She is the mother of two small kids, Sienna and Athena. Many familiar with her assert that family life was affectionate, but strained by the demands subsequently imposed by the marriage. Beatrice exhibits devotion and constancy. She is emotionally affected by betrayals, but feels obligated to uphold the household's honor. Edoardo Mozzi, an Italian-British property developer and founder of Banda Property, is an entrepreneur with a diverse background who joined royal life, recognized as a skilled salesperson and adept in the financial sector. Colleagues from his premarital employment remember him as eloquent, driven, and proficient in corporate terminology, strategic modernization, European expansion, and revitalizing dormant assets. Younger family members and certain advisors allegedly found this language appealing. In a time when the monarchy confronts inquiries regarding its relevance and financing, the allure of business-oriented solutions can be enticing. He has a son, Christopher Wolfie Wolf, from a prior relationship. Prior to the public revelation of the event discussed above, Mozzi was seen by many as a refined figure capable of reconciling private business with royal management. However, if the claims are substantiated, that same proficiency in business vernacular may have been used to obscure financial strategies that detractors see as self-serving. The preliminary discovery. In the fall of 2025, a standard examination of private estate finances associated with the late Queen Elizabeth II revealed the first signs of troubling findings. The audit was entrusted to Sophie in her job as a senior steward of family finances, which inherently entails a commitment to secrecy with a responsibility for oversight. The evaluation occurred inside the Royal Finance Office at Buckingham Palace, a space filled with ledgers, permission forms, mailboxes, and the subdued hum of systems designed to maintain the household's intricate financial management. The first phase of the job was procedural. Sophie and a small team of seasoned financial analysts and clerks meticulously navigated months of bills, contractor agreements, and permission memoranda, akin to a gardener tending to beds of paperwork, trimming, assessing foundations, and identifying what seemed robust and what did not. The royal finances include many interconnected ledgers, including the sovereign grant, private duchy money, personal allowances, and designated projects for maintenance or reconstruction. Protocols are stringent, substantial transfers need several approvals, and there are defined approval pathways intended to avoid misconduct. The system is designed to be robust to both errors and intentions at a distance. Sophie then saw a line that compelled her to halt. The transfer was significant in magnitude and conducted some months before involving a business named Emapili Mosey Limited. The name was phonetically cumbersome and sufficiently similar to Mapeli Motzi to warrant a second glance. Initially, the item seemed to be a clerical mistake, but upon further examination it lacked the customary documented supports: no royal permission letter, no detailed project brief. Merely a succinct accounting remark that failed to clarify its purpose or usefulness. The beneficiary firm had a minimal public presence, a newly established limited corporation, with an address that yielded ambiguous findings upon verification. An organization unlikely to obtain substantial funding designated for estate rehabilitation. Sophie's first worry was purely professional. In a system where precedent is significant, such an entry was irregular. She meticulously recorded the item, cross-referenced account numbers and dates, retrieved invoices and contract files, and thereafter made a discreet call to a long-standing financial advisor in the home, named by sources as Henry Grayson. Grayson has served the family for decades. His understanding of psychological processes is profound, and his advice often calmed rather than distressed. However, that chat did not provide solace. Witnesses said that Grayson's response was terse and strangely evasive. He recommended prudence and said that new financial arrangements had been implemented with support from senior authorities. They are implementing new structures, he allegedly informed Sophie, and initially certain aspects may appear unfamiliar. It is advisable not to fixate on nomenclature. Some accounts are intended to be terminated. When Sophie sought further details or documentation, his demeanor became defensive, seemingly not in defense of her, but rather of the process itself. He advised, according to reports, you should avoid becoming the one who disrupts the chain without comprehending the situation. Coded responses are significant in organizations founded on etiquette and hierarchy. It suggested two possibilities. Either there was a newly authorized, if clumsy, set of processes approved by a higher authority than the finance office, or there was something intentional and clandestine being concealed. Both scenarios heightened the stakes. Should the entry be harmless and Sophie have exaggerated its significance, she might jeopardize connections within a family already vulnerable to public scrutiny. If it were not benign, neglecting it may let a significant violation of trust go unaddressed. That evening, she resolved to pursue the paper trail instead of allowing it to go. The audit had evolved from a mere box-ticking exercise into a thorough probe. A covert inquiry. The subsequent actions included discreet, systematic efforts mostly conducted away from public view. Sophie adopted a prudent approach. She refrained from expressing mistrust since reputations were at risk, and the palace, as to any bureaucracy, operates on collaborative teamwork. Instead, she initiated a covert investigation into financial transactions associated in the accounting records with firms and accounts that may be linked in different ways to Mapeli Motzi. Ordinary matters became significant. Ordinary financial briefings at Clarence House meetings, typically designated for discussing estate upkeep budgets, forthcoming philanthropic commitments and logistical arrangements, were scrutinized more intently. Mapelli Mozzi had begun assuming a more significant position in these assemblies, proposing strategic initiatives for monetizing or redeveloping underutilized buildings, justifying alterations with polished presentations. He used terminology related to profit margins and anticipated returns in a manner that garnered attention. For personnel seeking an autonomous income foundation, his proposals seemed logical. Young courtiers and some advisors allegedly found his emphasis on modernizing wealth management invigorating. However, Sophie maintained a ledger before her juxtaposing speech with receipts. Minor anomalies began to accumulate when she reconciled headline data with transaction subledgers. A renovation project recorded in the primary accounts at $2.7 million frequently exhibited bills and contractor payments that, when aggregated, equaled a much lesser amount, in one case almost $1.9 million. Payments categorized as consultant fees in the central accounts were identifiable via company registers and corporate statements to entities having business affiliations with Bonda property. Contracts granted sole beneficiary status to unidentified consultants based on strategic advice provisions that were, in effect, ambiguous. Sophie initiated correspondence via meticulous emails to the royal auditors and external consultants, soliciting copies of supporting papers and asking for clarification without issuing direct allegations. The requests, as reported by those who subsequently saw the letters, encountered opposition. Email threads in which she had previously participated were curtailed and diverted to more restricted groups. She was gradually removed from calls and briefings that had been customary aspects of her employment. Colleagues subsequently characterized a subtle strategy of marginalization. Those who had previously been collegial started to depict her worries as conservative obstructionism and a reluctance to accept essential change. As the months progressed, the pressure intensified. Subsequently, 2 anonymous deliveries altered the nature of the evidence. An envelope was slid under the Duchess's study door, containing a solitary written page and many photocopied bills. The note stated in bold lettering, "If you were aware of the true destination of the funds, you would be unable to sleep again." The invoices, albeit of poor quality, documented a transfer of $850,000 to an offshore account bearing the authorizing signature EMM. Sophie, possessing samples of signatures from letters and contracts filed with the household, conducted a comparison of the mark. Sources indicate she discovered a remarkable similarity. 1 week later, another anonymous package came, this time containing an unsigned USB drive. Inserted inside an encrypted device, a usual measure for safeguarding sensitive personnel, it had, among many things, a compressed audio recording. Following a brief period of silence, a voice unmistakably recognized by listeners as Mapelli Mozzi articulated in a deliberate professional tone regarding off-book deals, the benefits of shell accounts to maintain discretion, and the necessity to divert funds to support new initiatives without excessive inquiry from the board. The terminology in the recording was unsettling precisely because it normalized the concealment of transactions. Were the packages the result of a whistleblower among the staff? Is there an external leak? No one has officially verified their origin. In that moment, Sophie prioritized the pattern anonymous documentation, corroborative audio, and signature proof, and a regular series of differences. It ceased to be a hypothesis. It seemed to indicate signs of intentional diversion. Managing such resources inside an institution that values careful consideration required meticulous attention. Sophie implemented measures to maintain the chain of custody. She documented the things, produced certified copies, transferred originals to distinct safe storage, and consulted a trusted family attorney to deliberate on further actions. The concern shared not just by her, but also by a select circle of top advisors was that addressing the matter publicly or outside conventional avenues may be more detrimental than beneficial. Leaks may harm innocent individuals and disrupt familial relationships. However, standing quiet in the face of potential misuse jeopardized the institutional foundation of confidence. The confrontation and a painful alliance. Confronted with what she deemed persuasive evidence, Sophie resolved to address those most directly involved. Instead of orchestrating a theatrical public revelation, she conducted a discreet, unannounced visit to Royal Lodge in Windsor, where Prince Andrew had a house, and where Beatrice and Mopelli were reportedly present. The choice to proceed without previous notification was strategic to present the issue in an environment where prompt coordination would be difficult and where any refutation would need direct confrontation. Within the private chambers of Royal Lodge, the atmosphere was homely, characterized by the tranquility of a late-afternoon sunshine traversing the carpets accompanied by the subtle clink of china from a tea tray. Beatrice and Mopelli were present in a modest sitting room. The interaction has been characterized by witnesses as both tense and personal in equal proportions. Sophie, as reported, refrained from requesting tea or engaging in small talk. She placed a leather folder on the table and said, "You need to see this," before elucidating the series of findings absent authorizations payments to firms with business ties to Mopelli holdings and the audio recordings. Beatrice's first response was instantaneous and fervent. Shock transformed into anger. She contended that Sophie harbored resentment against the marriage, asserting that the Duchess had misconstrued business terminology as malevolence. The narrative, as recounted by witnesses, swiftly became intimate. Beatrice, who had been emotionally involved in the partnership and collaborative endeavors with her husband, was compelled to face the prospect that a loved one had orchestrated an attack on the family's assets. Mopelli attempted to rationalize the situation using the protective jargon used in boardrooms, intricate investment structure, legal nuances, and lawful consultation fees. He discussed strategy and long-term advantages, seeking to present unconventional methods as essential modernization. However, when Sophie played the audio clip from the USB, the little room became quiet. The voice, despite the static, resembled his. A dispute over semantic interpretation evolved into a clash concerning deeds. Beatrice's response in the subsequent hours was introspective and multifaceted. As she traversed spaces that were formerly familiar, she allegedly experienced a profound disconnection from her own existence. The feeling of betrayal was palpable. An examination of her husband's studies yielded critical evidence contracts bearing the royal insignia that upon analysis conferred significant sums and privileges to entities associated with Banda property. These legal documents were well-crafted agreements, not haphazard drafts, which, as shown by later forensic analysis, diverted funds from estate budgets to private accounts under the pretense of redevelopment costs or consultation expenses. Confronted with such contracts, Beatrice undertook what her acquaintances subsequently characterized as a courageous but poignant move. Driven by a need to save the institution and her children, she duplicated damning papers and contracts discovered on his devices and consolidated them with the materials gathered by Sophie. She sent a succinct message, poignant but detached, imploring the Duchess to save the family and the crown. She then arranged for the papers to be delivered by a reliable courier. The action was both a betrayal and a safeguard she had in essence chosen to reveal her spouse to save the monarchy. The choice was agonizing and transformed personal allegiances. Individuals familiar with Beatrice said that her actions were driven not by malice, but by a feeling of obligation, a belief that the integrity of the crown must be maintained even at the expense of personal contentment. The bond between the Duchess and Beatrice, established not from fondness but from mutual responsibility, was tenuous and distressing. It would enable the family to confront the situation with irrefutable documentation. Deliberation in the council chamber. The mass of the documents generated by Sophie and Beatrice necessitated an internal investigation. A meeting was held in one of the palace's most secluded chambers, unofficially referred to by the staff as the Hidden Council Chamber. This wood-paneled hall, adorned with portraits and historical antiques, has been the site of several sensitive family decisions. On that day, it transformed into a space of evidence and reconciliation, where personal ties intersected with institutional mandates. Forensic accountants and external legal advisors delivered their conclusions with the precision of experienced detectives. Projection screens displayed transaction trajectories, funds transitioning from estate ledgers to companies registered in various jurisdictions, transfers channeled through shell entities and offshore accounts, and disbursements that ultimately concluded in accounts managed by or linked to enterprises associated with Middleton. The auditor's presentation used bank data, international SWIFT transactions, contractual provisions, and supporting evidence. The report presented to the gathered family and advisors was stark, the diversion of amounts substantial enough to be quantified in the tens of millions. Middleton's response was prompt and resolute. He condemned the claims as a smear campaign and characterized himself as a reformer persecuted by conservative factions apprehensive about change. His voice, previously assured, became strained when incriminating evidence was presented, contracts with his signature computerized transaction records and an audio tape disseminated around the investigative team. Beatrice, who had endured personal strife for weeks, stood with a slender folder in her hands. She extracted a document adorned with the royal seal and Middleton's signature and proceeded to his position at the table. She placed the paper before him and remained silent. The gesture had the significance of a conclusive verdict inside that exclusive assembly. A hush ensued. In the presence of senior family members, legal advisors, and accountants, Middleton's defenses started to weaken. The veneer of assured entrepreneurship diminished with the burden of documentation verification and confirmations from foreign banks about transactions. Sources informed about the discussion acknowledged with regret that the issue could not be managed only by familial discretion, since it had evident legal implications. Senior courtiers in attendance, individuals who had dedicated their lives to maintaining the monarchy's secret administration, conveyed remorse rather than animosity. A senior member voice, quavering with fatigue and obligation, highlighted the stark arithmetic institution versus individual duty versus personal devotion. "The crown," he said gently, "is not only an ornament, it is our responsibility." Beatrice, crying silently, suddenly spoke in a tone that was both intimate and commanding. "No one," she declared, "defiles this home." That nightfall, Middleton was accompanied from the palace by authorities not as a subject of controversy, but as an individual for whom appropriate judicial proceedings would follow. The council's acts were not performative. They were methodical and intentional. The family acted on internal evidence. They sought to maintain the institution's integrity instead of allowing a private infraction to escalate into a public crisis. Consequences and legal ramifications. The ramifications of the investigation extended beyond that concealed chamber in calculated bureaucratic measures designed to safeguard the family and the organization. The palace decided to refer the case to law enforcement and financial regulators, a decision that was both symbolic and pragmatic. Symbolic as it demonstrated the family's readiness to adhere to the rule of law, and pragmatic due to the extensive and intricate nature of the financial transactions necessitating international cooperation. Sources and subsequent court papers indicate that Middleton faced many counts associated with embezzlement, fraud, and money laundering. Investigations included many countries where shell corporations were established and monies were transferred. Subpoenas were issued for financial records from many European banks. Forensic accounting followed the financial trail via subsidiaries and trust arrangements to accounts connected with Banda property and other related businesses. Prosecutors, using the evidence provided by the Duchess Beatrice and collaborating financial institutions, constructed a case that transitioned from royal documentation to the public domain. The legal processes were intricate and lengthy. The activities included mutual legal aid requests, asset freezing orders, forensic analysis of electronic communications, and hearings about the tracking of assets internationally. Defense teams presented technical arguments on the legality of certain transfers and the extent to which contracts had been negotiated in good faith. Prosecutors underscored the violation of trust associated with misappropriating funds linked to a public institution, the intentional obfuscation of transactions, and the use of offshore corporations to disguise the money's destination. The procedure included negotiations on plea offers, possible restitution packages, and cooperation agreements. Authorities sought asset recovery where feasible, aiming to repatriate stolen cash and to dismantle opaque ownership structures that concealed beneficial ownership. The case required meticulous coordination among domestic prosecutors, international authorities, and financial institutions familiar with privacy regulations and confidentiality statutes. The criminal court finally adjudicated Mopelli guilty of the principal charges levied against him, as per subsequent reports and papers that surfaced. The sentencing considered both the measured extent of the diversion and the aggravating circumstance of a breach of trust concerning public assets. He received a jail sentence. Official palace declarations verified the revocation of his access to royal channels and the elimination of any perks accrued from closeness to the family. His name was discreetly and comprehensively eliminated from public-facing documents and affiliations associated with the home. Initially seen as a modernizing influence, he became a cautionary emblem, a narrative of ambition devolving into treachery. Cultural and institutional change. In parallel with the prosecution case, the palace began internal reforms. Sophie led a royal family financial governance research and reform after the inquiry exonerated her. She led the household to make many major changes to overcome the flaws that allowed complex contracts and off-the-record agreements to go unchecked. Reforms included elucidated authorization hierarchies for large transfers, mandatory external audits for projects over a threshold, strengthened anti-money laundering measures with independent third-party verifications of contractors and consultants, and a requirement that any new royal asset financial structures receive approval from intra-household advisors and an independent oversight board with statutory rep. Protocols improved beneficial ownership, due diligence, project budget, bill reconciliation, and intermediary firm monitoring. The provisions protected workers who complained. Criticism during the shadow inquiry suggested the institutional culture would exclude status quo opponents. New whistleblower pathways established independent channels for reporting financial issues outside the family, along with a charter protecting good faith whistleblowers. The goal was to openly discuss procedural issues without professional ramifications. Changes were neither symbolic nor the result of one interaction. The development took months of discussion with external auditors, legal experts, and governance specialists. Parliamentary committees and independent assessors advocated for legislative clarifications on asset supervision in the public-private nexus. The palace's official announcements acknowledged the problem and proposed ongoing external supervision and reporting. Reforming internal systems to meet contemporary financial governance standards was always the priority. Personal and social effects. Princess Beatrice responded subduedly yet significantly. She hid from the spotlight to focus on her children and recover. Her friends say she isolated Sienna and Athena to shield them from controversy and provide them a carefree upbringing. She moved from luxurious lodgings to a refurbished farmhouse where school commutes and home chores ruled her day. Royal colleagues perceived her absence as a sacrifice, a personal cost to maintain the family's image. Personal influence went beyond Beatrice. Daily routines and friendships suffered. Staff, having a close connection with the couple, struggled to balance personal and professional duties. Sophie faced more duty public criticism from opponents who thought she had overstepped and the emotional toll of pursuing a case that ended a marriage and culminated in a criminal conviction. Many colleagues recognized her acts as the quiet assertiveness companies need. Public opinion on the affair varied. Others saw it as proof that any institution, old or new, may be corrupt. Others saw the family's behavior as responsible, implying that members acted properly and restrainedly to sustain an institution that many Brits still value. Polling in the weeks following public disclosures showed sympathy for Beatrice, praise for the family's activities, and continuing questions about oversight and transparency. Politicians debated constitutional and ceremonial institutions' private wealth management after the affair. Committees of Parliament and civil society groups discussed the necessity for more explicit legislative oversight over non-public assets. In such meetings, the palace highlighted its practical initiatives and opposed recommendations that officials believed would too politicize the monarchy. Last assessment. According to those who read the paperwork and listened to the recordings, Edoardo Mapelli Mozzi's event is one of the family's biggest private issues in recent years. A violation of trust in private, the participation of family members, and the harrowing calculations that duty and loyalty decisions impose on familial and institutional guardianship make royal scandals especially distressing. Beatrice placing the royal seal contract on the council table epitomizes the scandal. The deed was genuine and symbolic, a private person offering public evidence of accountability. That moment, when love, duty, and historical continuity collided, highlighted a long-time royal tenet: personal sacrifice is necessary to preserve the institution. Beatrice's choice and Sophie's emphasis on proper documentation prevented a corruption that went beyond family finances and tarnished public confidence. Such preservation costs lives. Marriages ended, careers fell apart, friendships strained, and children's lives changed. Another less obvious but maybe more lasting effect was that scandal-driven corporations usually tighten their security. The palace's adjustments, a high-profile case's legal precedents, and improved internal control may prevent future misbehavior. The story goes beyond financial theft or access exploitation. More cruelly, it affects those who have to choose between tolerating anomalies for convenience or taking action at personal cost. Sophie's quiet professionalism and Beatrice's tragic sacrifice were choices between loyalty and civic responsibility. These conflicts are as old as hereditary traditions, making them tragic and enlightening. They show the flaws of archaic systems in a modern setting and the human fortitude needed to perpetuate them. While wounded, the royal family was resilient. It led to tangible changes, increased oversight, debate, and lasting personal legacies. The monarchy, like any lasting institution, depends on individuals willing to admit and fix failure. The story will now reflect the courage and expense of those who acted. Thank you for watching the video. Please let us know your thoughts, and goodbye for the time being.